The first game show that was broadcast on television was called Spelling Bee, and as the name suggests, it tested the spelling skills of the contestants involved. And since then, the genre has only grown in popularity. And thousands of different types of game shows have been aired over the decades. Most people who choose to appear on a game show are just normal members of the public, but in some cases, we find out after the fact that a contestant has a hidden secret and that they are, in fact, wanted criminals. Number 10. Megan Wants a Millionaire was a reality TV game show that aired in 2009. It featured a model named Megan Hauserman, who'd previously appeared on another reality TV show called Rock of Love, along with 17 millionaire suitors, all of whom vied for her affection. She'd previously stated that she wanted to become a trophy wife in an ideal world, and the show was the perfect means to make that wish a reality. All of the men who were chosen to appear on the show were single, with a net worth of at least $1 million. Strangely, after filming of the show started, Megan stated that her husband-to-be didn't have to be rich, but he had to be mature, stable, and able to, quote, handle her, and she added that he shouldn't cry easily. Among the men who were chosen to compete were TJ Diab, Francisco Becerra, Corey Thomas, Matt Riviera, and most notably, Ryan Jenkins, who became known during filming as Smooth Operator. Each episode, one or more of the bachelors were sent home for reasons laid out by Megan, and Jenkins was the first to go through to the second round at the end of the first episode. But by the 19th of August that year, the show was canceled by VH1 when it was discovered that Jenkins had been hiding a dark secret. Viewers of the show knew that Jenkins had once been married to a swimwear model named Jasmine Fiore. Ironically, they met in Las Vegas while he was filming the show, confirming just how unbelievable these types of shows really are. And when filming had concluded, the couple decided to get married. Jasmine's mother would later state that the marriage was in trouble from the get-go, and that Jenkins and her daughter would fight often. Eventually, Jasmine decided to have the marriage annulled, and she likely believed that she'd be able to move on with her life. But sadly, that was not the case. Some reports state that they decided to get back together just a few weeks later, or that they were considering trying to make their marriage work. But on the 13th of August, Jasmine went missing after she and Jenkins booked into a hotel in Del Mar, California. Staff at the hotel found it strange that he booked out of their room alone the next morning, and the day after that, their suspicions would be founded when Jasmine was found deceased in Buena Park, 20 miles outside of Los Angeles. Her remains have been placed inside a suitcase, which was found by a man who was looking for cans to collect and recycle. The police determined that she'd been badly assaulted by her attacker, who took further steps to conceal her identity. 32-year-old Jenkins was named as a suspect, but he could not be located as he'd fled out of the state by that point. It was discovered that he'd been in Blaine, Washington at some point when his abandoned car and boat were found there. It was then discovered he'd booked into the Thunderbird Hotel in Hope, British Columbia, in the company of an unknown woman. But by the time he was tracked down, he'd passed away, and he could not be charged with ending Jasmine's life. His family maintained his innocence, while the police have reiterated that they found no doubt of Jenkins' guilt, since he'd been charged with domestic battery against Jasmine in the past. The show was ultimately canned, and the production company, 51 Minds, released a statement in which they declared that they were simply unaware of Jenkins' checkered past. Number 9. Kerry Ketchum might just be one of the most brazen criminals of all time, since he decided to take part in a game show called Super Password, while being fully aware that he was being sought by the authorities. The show, which was hosted by Bert Convey, aired between 1984 and 89. Each episode had 2 teams containing one celebrity and one member of the public facing off against each other for a cash prize. A member from each team would give their teammate one-word clues, and their partner would then try to figure out a preset word. Each solved password would serve as a puzzle piece to the main password, and the first team to solve it would receive the prize. Ketchum, who was 36 years old at the time, was featured as a contestant on the show in January of 1988, but the show's producers and viewers were unaware of his real name, as he decided to compete under the pseudonym Patrick Quinn. He did well from the start and would remain unbeaten for 4 episodes, racking up an impressive $58,000 over the course of 4 days. This included a record-breaking $55,000 bonus jackpot, and viewers were impressed by his ability to solve the puzzles that he was presented with. But unbeknownst to everyone involved, Ketchum had a sordid history with the law. He once served as a sheriff's deputy in Ohio, but when he was caught stealing from the department's evidence room, he was summarily dismissed. When he applied for the show, he stated that he was employed by the government and that he'd been stationed at a listening post in Alaska for some time. Convey even remarked at one point that Ketchum's job sounds classified and that it seems as though he was working for the CIA. When his stint on the show came to an end, he'd won $58,000, a life-changing amount of money at the time, and it was clear that he was elated at his achievement. But he would have to wait a while before he could start spending the cash, since he would only receive his check a few weeks later. But during that time, he grew ever more impatient, and he decided to contact the show's producers with an excuse that he believed would expedite the payment process. He stated that he was about to leave the US, since he'd been transferred to a listening post in Turkey, and that he would not be returning for 6 to 18 months. What Ketchum didn't know was that his secret had already been revealed. A viewer recognized him as the man who'd used a fake name and falsified documents to buy a BMW, which was later found abandoned in Alaska. Strangely, Ketchum had used the same alias as he did on the show, and the viewer immediately knew who he was. In the meantime, the show's producers had contacted the Secret Service, and they formulated a plan for his capture. They told the production company to agree to pay Ketchum's winnings out early, and he was instructed to get his check for $58,000 from their offices on Sunset Boulevard in California, and Ketchum never suspected a thing. When he arrived at the offices, he was dismayed to find that he would not be receiving a check, and that federal agents were waiting for him. He was taken into custody after a brief chase when he was found hiding in a bathroom, standing on top of a toilet. Ketchum claimed that he should still receive the prize so that he could pay for a lawyer, but his request was denied, and after his arrest, he was forced to forfeit the entire amount while he spent 5 years behind bars. Number 8. Most game shows see their fair share of controversy while they're on the air, but one incident involving a man named John Cooper left viewers of the British game show called Bullseye stunned when his dark past came to light. The show ran from 81 to 95 and tested its contestants' dart-throwing skills, as well as their general knowledge. It pitted 3 pairs of contestants against each other, with one person acting as the darts thrower, while the other answered quiz questions. The darts thrower would select a category of questions by hitting certain sections of a dartboard, after which their partner would be presented with a piece of trivia that they would attempt to answer. The pair that scored the highest could choose whether to risk all of the money that they'd won on a grand prize, such as a car or a speedboat, but to win the prize, the winning pair would take turns throwing at the board in an effort to score 101 points. If they failed to do so, they would lose all their money and leave with what the show called just their bus fare home. In May of 1989, Cooper appeared on the show and he shared his love of the Welsh coastline and scuba diving with host Jim Bowen. He didn't fare too well on the show though, as he failed to answer enough questions correctly during the first round and had to step back. He'd be invited back a few rounds later, but failed once again, and in the end his appearance on the show was short-lived. By all accounts, his stint on the show would have been quickly forgotten, were it not for what he did next. 3 weeks later, he decided to rob 2 holidaymakers in Oxfordshire while they were vacationing in Pembrokeshire. He pointed a firearm at Peter and Gwenda Dixon while they were standing on the edge of a cliff and demanded that they hand over their cash, valuables, bank cards, and PIN numbers. They complied with his demands, hoping to escape with their lives, but sadly that was not the case. As soon as Cooper took possession of their belongings, he trained the firearm on his victims and fired, ending their lives where they stood. It soon came to light that he was also suspected of ending the lives of siblings Richard and Helen Thomas in 1985. He was eventually identified thanks to advancements in DNA technology, after a drop of biological material belonging to Peter Dixon was found on a pair of his shorts in Cooper's house. Upon searching the property, investigators found the firearm in question, and Cooper was sentenced to 4 life terms in prison. Number 7. Game shows are supposed to be lighthearted, family-oriented entertainment that's most often screened before the watershed, with some exceptions, of course. But that's not what a Turkish man named Zafer Kalanak had in mind when he appeared on a show called Luck of the Draw. The show followed the typical dating game show format, with the exception that most of its contestants had either been married before or had just come out of a failed relationship. It was also known for often pairing older contestants with younger ones, and by 2014, it had grown to be very popular in Turkey. Each contestant would describe what they were looking for in a new partner, while revealing a little about their lives. With this limited information at their disposal, they would each then have to make quick-fire decisions during an activity akin to speed dating, which would determine who they'd be paired up with. On many occasions, participants would reveal surprising and often scandalous details about their lives, such as financial hardships that they had faced, or why they were struggling to find a romantic partner. None of these revelations compared to what 62-year-old Zafer Kalanak had to say when he appeared on the show in May of 2014. He started by saying that he was an honest man who'd been unlucky in love, and admitted that he'd applied to appear on the show since he was in search of a wife. But as he started delving deeper into his past, it became clear he was very disturbed. He stated that when he and his cousin were both 17 years old, they decided to run away together so they could get married. His cousin was desperate to leave after she'd been betrothed to an elderly widower by her parents, and Kalanak decided to intervene. For 5 months, they lived with a few of Kalanak's family members, after which he claimed she started to change, though he didn't elaborate on those changes. He added that at some point he started to become jealous when the nephew of his cousin's betrothed started visiting his village, and unable to cope with the thought of losing her, he decided to end her life. For this crime, he spent less than 5 years in prison, despite being sentenced to 14. Following his release, he got married and had 2 children, but the relationship soon soured, and the couple decided to split up. He then started an affair with the married woman, who'd promised to divorce her husband shortly after they met. He added that he waited patiently for her to follow through on her promise, but when it became apparent that she had no intention of leaving her husband, he ended her life with an axe. Kalanak claimed this was an accident, and that the woman had merely gotten in his way while he was swinging the weapon. But, as is to be expected, his claims were dismissed, and he spent another stint in prison. At first, the host of the show seemed to disbelieve Kalanak's claims, but when it became clear that he was being truthful, she asked him to step off the stage. Audience members were left shocked, but Kalanak would later claim that he had done his time for the crimes that he'd committed in the past, and that he was a changed man. As he left the stage, he could be heard saying that bad luck seemed to follow him around, and that he'd leave it up to God to help him to find a new wife. Number 6. As a child, Edward Wayne Edwards had a tough time growing up. For most of his childhood, he lived in an orphanage where he was treated badly by the other children and the staff, but his adult life also got off to a bad start. When he decided to try and straighten out his life by joining the military, he was soon sent home after being dishonorably discharged when he realized that military life was not for him, and he was found to have gone AWOL. With no prospects to fall back on after leaving the military, he decided to adopt a life of crime to get by, and hence he'd spend a lot of time in and out of prison for various types of crimes, such as theft, arson, and robbing gas stations. At one point, he pointed to the FBI's 10 most wanted fugitives list, but he would then claim to have been reformed. Following this, he authored a book called Metamorphosis of a Criminal, in which he described how he was able to turn over a new leaf. The book became a bestseller, and Edward started giving talks at schools, churches, and colleges. He would explain that while he was serving one of his stints in prison, he'd met a man who helped him see the error of his ways. He eventually met a woman named Kay, whom he married, and the couple had 5 children together. He started buying houses, fixing them up, and then selling them again, and by all accounts he seemed to have settled down with his family and found peace. But in the family's home, a different narrative was playing out. His daughter would later reveal that Edward would either be very gentle and loving or extremely abusive, depending on his mood on any given day. Then in 1972, he decided to appear on a game show called To Tell the Truth, in which a celebrity panel would come face to face with 3 contestants, and they then had to guess which one of them had a criminal record. He explained that he was indeed a convicted felon, but added that he'd been reformed and even spoke about the book that he had published. He assured the audience that he was now a motivational speaker who helped troubled young people get their lives back on track. But in 1982, he'd returned to his old ways, and he was once again arrested for arson. His daughter, April, had started suspecting that Edward had committed more serious crimes in the past, and when she started investigating, she was shocked by what she'd uncovered. She found that he'd ended the lives of 2 people in Wisconsin and Ohio, respectively, and that he'd also ended the life of his foster son. He was arrested in 2009, and he made a full confession, after which he was handed the death penalty. It's suspected that he ended the lives of as many as 9 people, but this was never proven, since he passed away from natural causes while incarcerated in 2011. Number 5. One would imagine that someone who's being hunted by the police would keep as low of a profile as possible to evade capture. But this thought seemingly did not occur to 39-year-old Lu Hao, who decided to become a contestant on a game show called Happy League. The dating show was immensely popular in China during the latter part of the 2010s, despite it being very similar to most other dating game shows. A set of eligible bachelors would do their utmost to impress a woman, and in the end, she would end up choosing one of them with whom she'd go on a date with at some point. In 2011, Lu Hao, who was employed as a music teacher, decided that he wanted to try his luck in finding his soulmate, and he believed that appearing on Happy League was the best way to do this. As soon as he appeared on screen, Hao became a fan favorite, as he had a welcoming smile and seemed very confident in his abilities. Furthermore, he had impressive musical talents to fall back on. At one point, he serenaded the audience, much to their delight, and further won their favor with his Running Man dance, which was performed to high-energy techno music. The audience felt that he seemed certain to gain the affection of at least one of the women who were appearing on the show, and they were soon proven correct. One woman, whose name has not been released in media reports, became enamored with Hao's skills, and she chose him out of 8 possible partners, but she would soon come to regret that decision and consider herself lucky to have met him and escaped with her life. About a month after the show aired, an anonymous viewer contacted the police in Jilin City to report that they'd seen that particular episode and recognized Hao as a suspect in a case that occurred in the 90s. The tipster added that Hao had changed his hairstyle since, and that his jawline was no longer as defined as before thanks to weight gain. But they were certain he was the man that police were hunting for. The caller recognized his button nose and other facial features, and the police quickly acquired footage from the show. They then compared Hao's face to that of Wu Gang, a wanted criminal who used a sharpened blade to end a man's life outside a restaurant 13 years before he appeared on Happy League. For the next month, investigators gathered as much evidence against him as they could, and soon discovered that he'd grown very used to his new life and appearance, so much so that he believed he could appear on a game show without arousing any suspicion. Well, Gang was arrested and ultimately found guilty and handed a death sentence, with his execution delayed for 2 years. In China, if a death row inmate shows reform within these 2 years, their sentence is usually commuted to life in prison, but it remains unknown whether this was done in his case. Number 4. Jeopardy remains one of the most famous game shows to ever air on television. It was created by Merv Griffin in 1964, and thanks to its unique format, has remained a fan favorite for many decades. During each episode, contestants face off against each other as they try to win as much money as possible over several episodes. During each round, they're presented with the phrase from one of 6 categories, and they're then tasked with answering in the form of a question. Harder clues convert to more money if the question is answered correctly. In 1989, a man named Paul Curry decided to try his hand at the show. He managed to make it through 3 episodes and accumulate a total of $24,101 during that time. 3 years later, he met Linda Kincaid, a woman who was working at a nuclear power plant in San Diego County. The couple eventually decided to get married, but before long, Linda started to suspect that Paul wasn't all that he appeared to be. Her best friend, Mary, would later tell the police about a disturbing phone call that she had with Linda. She stated that Linda seemed anxious and afraid since Paul had started pressuring her to have all of her belongings transferred into his name. This included their mortgage, her 401k, and several other items. Furthermore, he'd started to insist that he wanted to take out a $1 million insurance policy on her life, but he refused to take one out on his own life, claiming that it wasn't necessary since Linda was 13 years older than him. She then discovered that he'd been lying about his past. He neglected to tell her that he'd been married twice before and that he had a child with one of his ex-wives. She confronted him about this, and to make it up to her, Paul booked a 3-day cruise, which turned out to be a disaster when they both fell ill with hantavirus. While Paul steadily recovered, Linda only seemed to become more ill, and she had to be taken to a hospital where she spent several weeks recovering. She was well enough to be released before doctors were able to figure out what had kept her ill for so long. But Linda returned to the hospital again on the 31st of December, 1993, when she became ill once again. Mary and her husband stayed in the couple's home with Paul while she was being treated, and it was then that Mary started suspecting that he was trying to harm Linda. At one point, nurses caring for her found a puncture mark in her IV drip, and the police were called since they believed someone was trying to poison her. Linda stated that the only suspect she could think of was her husband. Nothing further was done, and on the 9th of June 1994, Paul contacted Mary to ask for help as Linda had become unsteady on her feet and incoherent. Her condition only worsened during the night, and the next morning she was found deceased. A few weeks later, Paul collected the $1 million insurance policy, as well as Linda's 401k. It would then come to light that one of his ex-wives had also been poisoned in the past, and it took her more than a year to recover. And during that time, Paul suggested that they take out an insurance policy on her life. It was then discovered that Linda, a non-smoker, had been poisoned with nicotine, and Paul was arrested. He was found guilty of poisoning her and ending her life, and he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Number 3. MasterChef, a cooking-based reality TV game show, has been on air since the 2nd of July, 1990, and it remains as popular as it's ever been. At first, it was only shown in the UK, but thanks to its popularity, several different versions of the show are being broadcast in countries around the world. During each season, a group of amateur or celebrity chefs, depending on the particular version, are faced with increasingly harder cooking challenges, and they're then evaluated by a panel of judges who are usually famous chefs, many of whom have attained Michelin stars at their own restaurants. When all is said and done, the winning chef receives a large cash prize, which is usually the case in the US version, while chefs in the UK version usually only receive the MasterChef title. Most winners will go on to open their own restaurants with their winning credentials on full display. No one could have expected, though, that on the 9th series in the UK, viewers would get a glimpse of a serial killer, and no one would be any the wiser until a year later. In one clip from the show, 40-year-old Stephen Port could be seen serving spaghetti and meatballs to bus drivers in East London, England, while wearing a blonde wig, which he used to hide the fact that he was bald. This was done as part of a task that had been set for the chefs, and Port was one of the assistant chefs who were helping the British boy band member J.B. Gill, who was a contestant. About a year later in 2014, though, his true nature would be revealed for the world to see. His first victim, 23-year-old fashion design student Anthony Walgate, was found deceased on the 19th of June that year. Just 2 months later, on the 28th of August, his second victim was found and identified as 22-year-old Gabriel Kovari, who originally hailed from Slovakia. Then, in September of that year, the same person who'd come across Kovari's remains while walking their dog also found Port's third victim, 21-year-old Daniel Whitworth. The two men had been left in the same churchyard after their lives were ended. For the next year, no further victims were found, but in September of 2015, 25-year-old forklift operator Jack Taylor was found deceased, and it became clear to the police they were likely dealing with a serial killer operating in the London area. In all 4 cases, the victims had been given a lethal dose of gamma-hydroxybutyric acid, a central nervous system depressant which had claimed their lives. Port was named as a suspect, much to the shock of his family, who described him as a quiet and reserved person who'd never been in trouble with the law before. He was ultimately sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, having never shown any remorse for the crimes that he committed. Number 2. In 2019, Francois Verove, a retired Frenchman and serial killer known as the Pockmarked Man, appeared on the game show Everyone Wants to Take Their Place. While being interviewed, Verove spoke of his past patrols as a member of the cavalry regiment of the Republican Guard in the crime-ridden area of Bois de Boulogne. But he'd been dismissed from his role for an affair of vice in the same area. The show format involved general knowledge questions where contestants competed to dethrone the reigning champion, with elimination possible in the first round, which is where Verove was eliminated. Verove's dark past would soon be revealed, though. During the 1980s and 90s, turns out he'd used his police ID, handcuffs, and training while off-duty to detain, abduct, and assault young women in his patrol area, sometimes using his status to gain trust. After a German au pair and her boss were found deceased in Paris, DNA was collected, and years later, police suspected a retired Frenchman, and Verove's name came up. When he failed to appear for questioning, police found that he had fled, but Verove was later found deceased in a rented apartment. It's believed that he'd committed at least 30 attacks over a decade, but possibly more, using his former police position as an alibi. Number 1. A year before nurse Rebecca or Becky Bleefnick, the wife of Timothy W. Bleefnick, was found deceased, she'd reached out to the police and the courts in Quincy, Illinois for a protection order against her husband, but she was denied. Becky had become increasingly concerned that Bleefnick would harm her after their marriage started to deteriorate. She'd mentioned these fears to her family, who suggested that she file for a protection order against him, but the authorities didn't think that the order was necessary, and she was sent away empty-handed. In 2019, Bleefnick appeared on the massively popular TV show Family Feud, along with his parents, sisters, and brothers. The show, which is usually presented in a fun, lighthearted way, became a little darker while he was being interviewed, when one of his answers left the host, Steve Harvey, and audience members perplexed. When asked what the biggest mistake was that he'd ever made, Bleefnick replied, saying "I do," referring to his marriage to Becky. At the time, everyone present laughed it off as an ill-conceived effort at humor, but in retrospect, it was more foreshadowing than anyone expected. Harvey was stunned into silence for a few seconds, but the show returned to normal when Bleefnick looked at the camera saying, "Honey, I love you," and jokingly admitted, "I'm going to get in trouble for that, aren't I?" At one point, he managed to provide the second best answer on the board. He and his family managed to advance to the fast money round, and by the end of the game, they'd won a total of $20,000. The events from that episode would later be revisited after Becky was found deceased by her father in her and Bleefnick's home on the 23rd of February 2023. The police were called, and when they processed the scene, they discovered that her bedroom door had been forced open, after which her assailant attacked her with a firearm. The attack was undoubtedly personal, as she'd been wounded 14 times, and investigators were certain that her life was ended by someone she was close to, such as her husband, whom she was fearful of. It would come to light that Bleefnick had filed for a protection order against Becky in 2009, when she repeatedly called him to ask if she could see their son, and demanded to know where their other children were following their separation. Becky filed for an order a month after Bleefnick entered the home uninvited and removed certain items without her permission. The police suggested that she file for a restraining order instead. At one point, while they were still together, Becky told Bleefnick that she was afraid of him, and when she decided to sleep in one of their children's bedrooms, he threw her bedding into the basement. He also threatened to assault her with a garden hose, and as the relationship worsened, he became ever more controlling. A month before Bleefnick attacked her, Becky had texted her sister to say that she feared he might end her life, and that she was also worried about her children's safety. After she was found deceased, there was little doubt that Bleefnick was the one who attacked her, and he was promptly arrested. He was found guilty and sentenced to 3 life terms in prison without a possibility of parole, which means he'll never walk free ever again. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you liked this video, be sure to hit that like button. Also, don't forget to subscribe and click that notification bell to keep up to date with all of our future uploads. But my name is Ty Knotts, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.